The US president is one of the most powerful people on earth, but it doesn't mean they are perfect. They are human too, just like us, so they could have their sins. I found 7 US presidents in history who could be the candidate for the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust. Okay, we start with the first sin: pride. Pride is defined as an excessive love of one's own excellence. It is considered the worst sin that generates other ones. This perfectly sums up our candidate for the sin, President Lyndon Barnes Johnson. Let's be honest here, you couldn't achieve that much power without a bit of arrogance. However, Johnson is just on another level of that. I mean, anyone who names his meat Jumbo must have one hell of a pride. Johnson is always known for his crazy desire to succeed and be recognized as one of the greatest presidents ever. Johnson's pride played a major role in his ambitious Great Society programs. He aimed to create a lasting legacy by implementing widespread social reforms. He believed he was the one who could transform his country. During his time in the Oval Office, LBJ vetoed 30 bills, more than any president in history. How did he do that without being overridden by the Congress? It is because he had his own brand of persuasion called the Johnson treatment. By that, he used his imposing physical size and intimidating personality to emphasize his point. This surely was effective as hell. His pride did bring him some success, but it also destroyed his reputation. Johnson inherited the mess of Vietnam from his predecessors. He always wanted to be remembered as one of the greatest presidents ever, not the president who let Vietnam fall into communism. He was ready to escalate the war in Vietnam and bring the American troops to fight there, although he always thought this was the war South Vietnamese should fight by themselves. But the situation wasn't any better. The war was just unwinnable, and the president knew it. Johnson spent years saying the US was winning the war to the public, even though he knew exactly what was happening ocean away. The reason he did that was more complicated than just his pride, but it did contribute to it. And when things were exposed after the Tet Offensive, the support for Johnson went so low that he decided not to run for president again.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
That said, it was not that Johnson's successor was any better. He is our choice to represent the next sin: envy. The name of the sin explains itself. Envy is resentment or sadness at another's good fortune or excellence, with an often insatiable desire to have it for oneself. So why is Nixon the perfect candidate for this sin? Well, I'm sure you will say the Watergate scandal. It's true, but he already showed signs of envy long before that. Do you know that despite being rivals in the 1960 presidential election, Kennedy and Nixon were actually friends? How close they were is up for debate, but surely they didn't hate each other. However, Nixon was somewhat jealous of JFK for being such a popular president. Kennedy was cold, impersonal. He treated his staff like dogs, particularly his secretaries and the others. His staff created the impression of warm, sweet, and nice to people, reads a lot of books, a philosopher, and all that sort of thing. That was a pure creation of mythology. We have created no mythology. Another example of Nixon being paranoid and envious is his enemies list, a compilation of individuals and organizations he perceived as threats to his administration. This list included journalists, politicians, and activists who were critical of Nixon or whom he envied for their influence and public standing. The existence of such a list demonstrated Nixon's obsession with those he viewed as rivals. And, of course, the Watergate scandal. His intense suspicion and jealousy of political opponents led to the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. Although it is not clear whether Nixon directly ordered the break-in, he did try to cover it up. What did all that thing lead to? His place at the Oval Office. He was still the first and the only president to ever resign from the role. Nixon's secret tape reveals much more about him, including his poor anger control, which is the definition of the next sin, wrath. But we only can choose one to represent each sin, so we go with another. I can guarantee he is an even more perfect candidate. Here he is. Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, was a strong-willed, argumentative, and combative person. His hot-tempered personality perfectly represents the sin of wrath. One of the best evidence to prove this claim is Jackson's method to defend his honor: duels. Throughout his life, Andrew Jackson got involved in numerous duels. His first one came in 1787 when he worked as a lawyer in Jonesboro. His opponent was another lawyer named Waitstill Avery, who dared to impugn his character. The duel ended when the two guys fired in the air. 11 years later, Jackson and Governor John Sevier had a beef. They met to duel, but luckily no bullet was fired this time. In 1806, Jackson once again got involved in another duel with Charles Dickinson. This time it was about a horse race. Dickinson allegedly insulted Jackson's wife in the heat of the argument, and then they fired bullets at each other. Dickinson was killed while Jackson suffered a serious wound. Of course, he survived because, if not, he would never become the president in the future. The aggressive behavior of Andrew Jackson makes him the perfect president for the sin wrath. If only he could share some of his aggression with the next president, whom we think is the candidate for the next sin: sloth. Sloth can be defined as laziness or failure to act. Buchanan's action before the Civil War is exactly the first thing that comes to mind when you hear those words. To be fair, Buchanan was at one of the most intense times in the U.S.'s history. The Civil War seemed inevitable at that point, and it would happen sooner or later. Don't get me wrong, Buchanan was not innocent at all. Many of his actions during his presidency did embolden the South to expand slavery throughout the country. However, it is not the point of the video, so we can talk about it on another day. What we want to discuss here is how passive he was after Abraham Lincoln was elected as his successor. During this lame duck period, Buchanan watched many southern states begin to secede or make noise about their secession. What did he do to react? Nothing. He could have moved to secure the Harper's Ferry arsenal, or at least empty it. He did not. He could have supplied and fortified the Charleston forts, including Fort Sumter. He did not. He could have fired Secretary of War John Floyd, who was a Southern sympathizer before Floyd moved arms into the South. He did not either. He was just sitting his ass out and left it to his successor. Buchanan later spent his remaining lifetime saying he couldn't do anything at that period to defend his sloth sin. Buchanan was often labeled as one of the worst presidents in the history of the U.S. The next candidate for the sin greed also was given that title, the 45th president of the United States, Donald Trump. Let's be honest here, Trump can be fit in multiple sins here and no one can argue it. However, we only have one president for each sin. Therefore, we place him in the greed. Greed can be defined as an intense desire for material wealth or gain. As you already know, Donald Trump is a businessman and a billionaire. There's no way a man who archives that status without being greedy, right? The list of Trump's greediness cases can be easily made into a multi-hour length video. This video will not be that long. So, we picked up just a prime example for you. So, in 2005, Donald Trump opened Trump University, which isn't a university in the first place. It was a for-profit series of courses about real estate and entrepreneurship. It also pushed people to buy Trump's books. The course claimed that attendees would be taught his secret to be a real estate guru. The price is here. A one-year apprenticeship at the Educational Institute cost $1,495. A membership, over $10,000. And Gold Elite classes ran $35,000. It feels like a cheap price to pay to be a successful businessman, right? It's only the case if the courses provided exactly what they advertised. Students had alleged that Trump University, which was open from 2005 to 2010, used false advertising and high-pressure sales techniques to lure them to free investor workshops at which they were sold expensive seminars and told they would be mentored by real estate gurus, leading to the loss of thousands of dollars in tuition. Of course, one day the attendees would stand up. Trump had to pay $25 million to settle the case. He has refused to pay the victims of his fraudulent university for years until the court forced him to cough it up. As we said, Trump could fit into many other sins, not just greed. Let's take the next sin, gluttony, for example. I mean, that makes sense because he is a 215-pound guy. However, it is nothing compared to our choice to represent this sin. William Howard Taft, unfortunately, won the contest for the heaviest president ever. His height was only 5 feet 11 inches, but his weight at peak was 340 pounds. That's far from looking fit. This partly comes from his diet. According to his chief housekeeper, Elizabeth Jaffray, President Taft was her hungriest boss. For him, Jaffray bought butter by the tub, potatoes by the barrel, fruit and green vegetables by the crate, she wrote, and a lot of meat. Taft ate steak for breakfast. He wanted a thick, juicy 12-ounce steak nearly every morning. Now you know why he was overweight. There was even a famous story about how he was stuck in the White House bathtub. The story is not true, by the way, but the truth is that he had a bathtub customized for his size says a lot. Fortunately, Taft knew that he was overweight and he hated it, so he followed a weight loss program and hired Dr. York Davies as his dietary advisor. His condition was improved eventually. Now we move to the last sin, lust. Lust can be defined as the disordered desire for or inordinate enjoyment of sexual pleasure. According to that, we have the perfect U.S. president to represent it, Bill Clinton. Throughout his life, especially since he became the 42nd president of the United States, Bill Clinton got involved in numerous sexual scandals. The most famous one, of course, is the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. Back then, Clinton was already the president, and Monica Lewinsky was a 22-year-old intern in the White House. The relationship, which occurred between 1995 and 1997, led to a significant political and legal crisis when it became public. Clinton initially denied the affair under oath, famously stating,
"I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky."
However, evidence, including Lewinsky's testimony and physical evidence of their encounters, contradicted his denial. This led to Clinton's impeachment by the House of Representatives on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice in 1998. Before the Lewinsky scandal, Clinton faced a sexual harassment lawsuit from Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee. Jones alleged that Clinton had made unwanted sexual advances towards her in a Little Rock hotel room in 1991, while he was governor of Arkansas. The lawsuit was initially dismissed, but later settled out of court, with Clinton agreeing to pay Jones $850,000 without admitting any wrongdoing. Besides these infamous cases, Clinton also faced many other cases and allegations related to sexual assault or misconduct. So, without a doubt, he was the best choice for the sin lust.